Have you ever thought about the barbarian at the gates? It's one of history's most powerful images, fierce horse-riding nomads from the untamed wilderness, threatening the great settled civilizations. You've heard of the Huns, the Mongols, the Turks. But long before any of them, there was the original blueprint, the first great nomadic empire to go head-to-head with a superpower. They were the Xiongnu. For over 300 years, they were the northern shadow to China's mighty Han Dynasty, so powerful that they inspired the building of the Great Wall. And then they vanished. Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're exploring the epic collapse of the Xiongnu Empire, a story of brutal ambition, world-changing wars, and a climate crisis that brought a superpower to its knees. The story of the Xiongnu Empire really begins with one man, a ruthless genius named Modu Chanyu. Before Modu came along in the late 3rd century BCE, the Xiongnu were just one of several tribes on the vast Mongolian steppe. Modu's own father, the king, wanted to get rid of him to favor a younger son. His plan was devilish. He sent Modu as a hostage to a rival tribe, the Yuezhi, and then launched a surprise attack on them, hoping they'd execute his son in revenge. But Modu was no pawn. He stole a prized horse, escaped, and returned home a hero. His father, either impressed or terrified, gave him command of 10,000 horsemen. This is where Modu forged his terrifying instrument of power. He invented a special whistling arrow and gave his men a chilling order. When I fire my whistling arrow at something, if anyone does not shoot in the same direction, I will execute him. He first fired the arrow at his own favorite horse. Some men hesitated. Modu had them executed on the spot. Next, he fired the arrow at his favorite wife. Again, some attendants flinched. They were immediately beheaded. Finally, he aimed the arrow at his father's finest horse. This time, every single man fired without hesitation. They were ready. During a hunt with his father, Modu aimed his whistling arrow at the king himself. 1,000 arrows followed, and Modu became the new Chanyu, the supreme ruler of the Xiongnu. With this ruthlessly loyal army, Modu crushed all his rivals, uniting the entire Mongolian plateau into a single, massive empire. He organized his people into a decimal system with units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, allowing for lightning-fast mobilization of a massive army. This model was so effective, Genghis Khan would copy it 1,400 years later. Just as Modu was building his empire, the Han Dynasty was rising in China. The new Han Emperor, Gaozu, confidently led an army north in the year 200 BCE to punish the Xiongnu. It was a disaster. Modu used a classic steppe tactic, pretending to be weak and luring the emperor's army deep into the mountains near Baideng. Then he sprang his trap. The emperor and his army were surrounded for 7 days, freezing and starving. They only escaped because an advisor smuggled a drawing of a beautiful woman to Modu's wife, with a message saying the Han would now offer their most beautiful ladies to Modu for his freedom. Fearing she'd be replaced, she convinced Modu to let them go. This humiliation forced the Han into a policy called the Heqin, or peace and kinship. For the next 60 years, the Han Dynasty sent massive annual payments of silk, wine, and grain, along with a royal princess to marry the Chanyu. Essentially, the mighty Han Empire was paying protection money. The Xiongnu were the undisputed masters of the steppe, and the Han could do nothing about it. But this uneasy peace couldn't last. By the mid-2nd century BCE, a new emperor sat on the Chinese throne. His name was Emperor Wu, and he was ambitious, energetic, and viewed the Heqin policy as a national disgrace. He wasn't interested in appeasing the Xiongnu, he wanted to destroy them. Emperor Wu mobilized the entire state for war. He created government monopolies on salt and iron to fund his armies and began a massive horse breeding program to build a cavalry force that could fight the Xiongnu on their own terms. The war began in earnest in 133 BCE with a failed Han ambush. But soon, 2 brilliant generals emerged who would change everything. Wei Qing and Huokubing. In 127 BCE, Wei Qing recaptured the strategic Ordos region south of the Yellow River. Then, his nephew, the daring Huokubing, led deep raids into Xiongnu territory. In 121 BCE, at just 19 years old, Huokubing drove the Xiongnu out of the Gansu corridor, a vital link to Central Asia. This campaign was a masterstroke that cut the Xiongnu off from trade routes and paved the way for the Silk Road. The climax came in 119 BCE with the Battle of Modu. The Han sent two massive armies deep into the Gobi Desert to find and destroy the Xiongnu court. After a grueling march, Wei Qing's army met the Chanyu's main force. Using his supply wagons as a mobile fortress and a sudden sandstorm as cover, he routed the Xiongnu army. The Chanyu himself barely escaped. This battle was a staggering victory. The Han had proven they could march into the heart of the steppe and win. The Xiongnu were forced to retreat north, their power and prestige shattered. But this relentless military pressure from the Han was only one part of the story. The Xiongnu's own internal politics and a changing climate were creating a perfect storm of collapse. The Xiongnu system of succession was a critical weakness. When a Chanyu died, it often triggered a violent free-for-all between his brothers, sons, and nephews. The defeats at the hands of the Han weakened the Chanyu's authority, making these civil wars even more destructive. On top of this, disasters struck from the sky. Modern science, from studying tree rings and lake sediments, tells us that the mid-1st century BCE was a time of severe climate change on the steppe. Unusually harsh winters and dry summers led to the mass death of livestock. For a society whose wealth was on the hoof, this was catastrophic. It meant famine, widespread discontent, and even more intense competition for dwindling resources. Around 58 BCE, this perfect storm of military defeat, political chaos, and climate crisis exploded. The Xiongnu Empire shattered into a civil war with 5 different nobles declaring themselves Chanyu. 2 brothers eventually emerged as the main rivals, Zhiji in the west and Huanye in the east. Huanye, in the weaker position, made a shocking decision. In 53 BCE, he chose to submit to the Han Dynasty and become their vassal. In 51 BCE, he personally traveled to the Han capital and bowed before the emperor, a moment of incredible triumph for the Han. With Han's support, Huanye secured his rule over the Xiongnu who remained. His brother Zhiji fled west, carving out a new kingdom for himself in modern-day Kazakhstan. But the Han couldn't tolerate a rogue Xiongnu state, threatening the new Silk Road. In 36 BCE, a daring Han general named Chen Tang marched an army across the mountains, cornered Zhiji in his fortress, and killed him. His head was sent back to the capital and displayed on the city walls. The first Xiongnu Empire was effectively over. But the story doesn't end there. For nearly a century, the southern Xiongnu, led by Huanye's descendants, lived as vassals of the Han, serving as a buffer force on the frontier. This peace was shattered in the late 40s CE when the steppe was once again struck by severe drought and a plague of locusts, killing 2/3 of their livestock. This new crisis triggered another succession dispute, and in 48 CE, the Xiongnu split for the final time. The southern Xiongnu were settled by the Han inside Chinese territory. The northern Xiongnu, who remained in Mongolia, were now isolated and caught in a vice. To their south were the Han and their southern Xiongnu cousins. To their east, a new nomadic power was rising, the Xianbei. The Han, sensing the kill, launched their final campaigns. The death blow came in 89 CE at the Battle of the Altai Mountains. A combined Han and southern Xiongnu army crushed the northern Xiongnu. 2 years later, a final expedition forced the last northern Chanyu to flee west, disappearing from history forever. So what happened to these defeated remnants? Chinese sources say they fled west, beyond the Altai Mountains. And this is the foundation for one of history's most tantalizing theories, the Xiongnu-Han connection. This theory suggests that these fleeing Xiongnu migrated across the vast Eurasian steppe for generations, mixing with other peoples along the way. Nearly 300 years later, they erupted into Eastern Europe as the people the Romans called the Huns, who, under Attila, would help bring down the Western Roman Empire. While it's not definitively proven, the geographical and chronological line makes it a compelling possibility. The Han victory in Mongolia may have been the first domino to fall in a chain reaction that ended with the sack of Rome. And what about the southern Xiongnu, who had sided with the Han? They lived inside China for centuries, slowly losing their nomadic identity. But in the early 4th century CE, when China's Jin dynasty tore itself apart in a civil war, a Xiongnu leader named Liu Yuan saw his chance. Claiming descent from both the Xiongnu Chanyu and the Han emperors through the princesses sent in marriage centuries before, he declared himself the rightful emperor. His armies sacked the Chinese capitals, destroyed the Jin dynasty, and plunged northern China into more than a century of warfare. In a final, ironic twist, the descendants of the Xiongnu played the key role in destroying the Chinese dynasty that had once sheltered them. So in the end, the collapse of the mighty Xiongnu Empire wasn't caused by a single event. It was a slow, grinding, unraveling driven by three powerful forces. First, relentless external military pressure from a resurgent Han dynasty that had learned to fight and win on the steppe. Second, debilitating internal decay with vicious succession crises that the Han expertly exploited. And third, a changing climate that crippled their pastoral economy at the worst possible moments. The fall of the Xiongnu reshaped Eurasia, creating a power vacuum that allowed new empires like the Xianbei to rise, and possibly kicking off the great migrations that would remake the map of Europe. So what are your thoughts on this? Could the Han victory over the Xiongnu really have led to the fall of Rome? Let us know down in the comments. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.